At the church steps, a little girl said to the young homeless woman, "I think you need a hug." The streets were quiet, except for the occasional hum of a car passing in the distance. Clara, a young woman with tired eyes and messy hair, sat on the cold stone steps of the old neighborhood church. Her coat was thin and worn, the kind that had seen many winters and countless days outdoors. She pulled it tighter around her, trying to keep some warmth in her bones. Her legs were crossed, and her hands rested on her knees, shaking slightly from the morning chill. She had been sitting there for nearly an hour, staring at the street, watching the few people who had started their day. Most of them walked by without noticing her. Some glanced briefly, frowning, as if they couldn't understand why anyone would sit there. A few tossed her a quick, polite nod, and one man even dropped some coins in a small tin she had set beside her. But mostly, she was invisible, as if she were part of the steps themselves. Clara thought about her life, how she had ended up here. She had not always been homeless. There had been a time when she had a small apartment, a job she could manage, and people who cared. But one thing after another had gone wrong. A sudden illness, a job lost, a friend who had promised help but never came through. It all piled up until she had nowhere to turn. Now the steps of the church had become her resting place, a quiet corner in a busy world, where no one asked questions and no one expected answers. The cold air stung her cheeks, and she pulled her coat even tighter. She felt the familiar ache in her stomach from not having eaten a proper meal the night before. Hunger was a constant companion, but it was nothing compared to the loneliness. Clara had long ago stopped hoping for someone to notice her, for someone to care. She had grown used to the weight of being invisible, to the cold looks, to the whispered judgments. The world seemed to move around her, never stopping, never slowing down, never noticing the small, broken pieces of people like her. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, a soft sound broke through the morning stillness, a little laugh, light and bright, that seemed to float down the street like a balloon. Clara looked up and saw a small girl skipping toward the church. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, with a red scarf around her neck and tiny boots that made little tapping sounds on the steps as she moved. Clara watched as the girl ran ahead of her mother, who walked more slowly behind, carrying a small bag of groceries. The little girl's eyes met Clara's, and for a moment everything stopped. Clara blinked, unsure if she had imagined it. The girl didn't look away or frown or hesitate. Instead, she paused a few feet away, tilting her head slightly as if trying to understand something she could not explain. Clara felt a strange warmth in her chest, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or maybe just curiosity. "Hello," the girl said, her voice small but clear. Clara was startled. She had grown so used to silence, to being ignored, that hearing someone speak to her felt like a small miracle. She looked up fully now, meeting the little girl's gaze. The girl's eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of concern and innocence, the kind of concern that only children could have, pure and unfiltered. "Hi," Clara replied softly, unsure what else to say. The little girl stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. "Are you okay?" she asked. The simplicity of the question, the genuine concern in her tone, caught Clara off guard. Most people would not ask such a thing. Most people would look away, mutter something, or simply pretend she wasn't there. Clara wanted to shrug, to mumble some vague answer and hide behind her coat again. But something about the girl's presence, about her tiny courage, made her pause. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she might not be completely alone in the world. I'm fine," Clara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Her stomach twisted, her heart ached, and her mind wandered back to all the nights she had spent on cold benches or in the dark corners of parking lots, trying to sleep while the wind bit at her skin. The little girl didn't seem to notice her hesitation. She tilted her head again, her eyes full of thought. "I think you need a hug," she said simply. The words were quiet, almost casual, but they carried a weight that Clara didn't expect. Clara froze, a hug, from a child, from anyone. She hadn't been hugged in months, maybe even years. She felt her throat tighten, and for a moment she was unsure if she should laugh or cry. The idea seemed almost impossible, almost magical, and yet it was so human, so real. The little girl took another small step forward, her hand outstretched in innocence. "It's okay," she said softly. "I just want to help." Clara looked at her hand, then at her face. She could see the genuine kindness there, untainted by judgment, without any expectation. It was so simple and yet so rare. She felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she had missed small acts of human kindness, how much she had craved connection without even knowing it. Slowly, carefully, Clara reached out and opened her arms. The little girl stepped closer and wrapped her tiny arms around Clara. At first, the hug was awkward, unsure, a meeting of two people from very different worlds. But then Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a gentle reminder that she was not invisible, that someone very small, very innocent, cared enough to reach out. The hug didn't solve everything. Clara was still hungry, still cold, still without a home. But for the first time that day, maybe for the first time in many days, she felt a small spark of hope. The world, at least in that moment, seemed a little less harsh, a little more human. The little girl pulled back slightly, her cheeks red from the morning air. "What's your name?" she asked, curiosity bright in her voice. Clara hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Clara," she said. "I'm Lily," the girl replied. "Do you want to sit with me and my mom for a little while?" Clara blinked, surprised. The offer was simple, innocent, yet it felt like a lifeline. For so long she had been ignored, passed by, forgotten. And now, a child with no reason to care was offering her a place in her small world. Clara nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. She stood up, brushing off her coat, and followed Lily toward the church steps where her mother was waiting. It was a small step, a quiet moment, but it was the beginning of something new, a moment where hope, kindness, and human connection began to break through the walls she had built around herself. As they sat together, Clara watched the little girl chatter happily about school, her favorite books, and the bright red scarf she had chosen that morning. And though Clara did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, she felt a little less invisible, a little more alive. The morning sun continued to rise, and for the first time in a long time, Clara dared to imagine that perhaps she too could rise above the cold steps and find warmth again. Clara had never felt anything quite like it. The small, innocent kindness from Lily had shaken something deep inside her. She kept thinking about the hug, how it had melted a little of the cold, heavy armor she had built around her heart. It was strange, almost impossible to believe that someone so young could offer something so simple and yet so powerful. She found herself staring at the little girl as they sat together on the church steps, feeling both grateful and hesitant. Lily's mother, a kind-looking woman with a gentle smile, looked at Clara and nodded. "Would you like some tea?" she asked softly. Clara blinked, startled. No one had ever offered her tea before. Most people avoided her, hurried past, or only glanced at her from a distance. She hesitated, unsure if it was safe to accept such generosity. But the warmth in Lily's eyes, the honesty of the little girl's concern, nudged her forward. "Yes, thank you," Clara said quietly, her voice low but steady. She felt a little nervous, as if she didn't belong in the world she had just stepped into. Lily's mother guided her into the church hall, a small room filled with sunlight pouring through stained glass windows. The colors danced across the walls and floor, painting patterns of red, blue, and gold. Clara had never noticed such beauty before. Her eyes lingered on the changing lights, and for a moment she forgot the weight of hunger and cold. Lily handed Clara a small cup of warm tea, steam curling up like little clouds. Clara cupped it between her hands, savoring the warmth. It felt like more than a drink. It was comfort, care, a reminder that someone could still be kind even in a world that often felt harsh and cruel. She took a slow sip and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth spread through her chest. "You're very quiet," Lily said, tilting her head as she watched Clara. "Do you want to tell me why you're sitting on the steps?" Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about herself, and she certainly wasn't used to children asking real questions with no judgment. Most people, she thought bitterly, would just stare or look away or worse, judge her. But Lily looked curious, not judgmental, and her eyes were full of patience. I don't really have a place to go," Clara said slowly. "I've been living on the streets for a while now." Her voice trembled slightly, even as she tried to keep it steady. She had never admitted it aloud in such a gentle setting. Most people only saw her as trouble or someone to avoid. But here, in this warm, sunlit room with a small girl and her mother, it felt possible to be honest. Lily's eyes widened, and she reached across the table to touch Clara's hand lightly. "I'm sorry," she said simply, the words sincere and pure. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. No one had ever said that to her with such kindness before. Most apologies she had heard were awkward, forced, or accompanied by pity. This felt different. It felt real. "You don't need to be sorry," Clara replied quietly. She wasn't sure why she said it. Perhaps because the words had been spoken too often in other ways, or maybe because she didn't want anyone to pity her. But inside, a little seed of trust was beginning to grow, a seed she hadn't felt in a long time. They talked for a while, Lily chattering about school, her favorite books, and the bright red scarf she wore that morning. Clara listened, sometimes smiling faintly, sometimes simply nodding. The normalcy of the conversation felt foreign to her. It had been years since she had talked about anything that wasn't survival or hardship. The small, simple words of Lily reminded her of a life that she had long left behind, a life where people cared about each other without expecting anything in return. Lily's mother joined in the conversation gently, asking Clara about her life in small, careful questions. Clara told them a little about herself, skipping the parts that were too painful and focusing on the memories that were easier to share, like learning to draw as a child or the smell of fresh bread from her mother's kitchen. Each word felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because it reminded her of all she had lost, light because someone was actually listening. Someone cared enough to hear her story. Time seemed to slow as Clara sat there. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the world was passing her by. Instead, she felt seen. Truly seen by someone so small and innocent and by someone older and kind. It was a feeling she had long forgotten, a feeling that reminded her that the world still held gentle surprises, even for those who had been hurt or left behind. The morning passed quietly, filled with small moments of laughter and soft conversation. Clara began to notice the little things she had overlooked in her life on the streets, the smell of coffee brewing, the sunlight shining through colored glass, the sound of children laughing. These were not luxuries, she realized, but reminders that life could hold beauty even in hard times. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, she allowed herself to hope that her life could change, even just a little. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Clara noticed that her stomach still ached, her body still ached, but the heaviness in her heart had lifted slightly. The little girl's simple act of kindness, offering a hug without judgment, had broken through walls Clara had built around herself. It had reminded her that connection was possible, that people could still care, that hope was not completely gone. Before leaving, Lily held Clara's hand and said, "Will you come back tomorrow? I can show you my favorite garden behind the church." Clara looked into the little girl's eager eyes and felt a warmth spread through her chest. She nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. "I think I would like that," she said. Clara walked away from the church steps that day feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet sense of belonging, even if only for a few moments. She didn't have a home yet, and she didn't know what the future would hold. But she carried with her a small spark, a memory of a little girl's courage and innocence, and the warmth of a hug that had reminded her she was not completely alone. The streets felt less empty on her walk back, less cold, less unwelcoming. Each step reminded her that small acts of kindness could make a difference, even in the most unlikely places. Clara thought about the stories she had been telling herself about the world, that it was cruel, unkind, and indifferent, and realized that perhaps there was more to it than that. Perhaps there were people willing to reach out, to care, to help, even in small ways. That evening, as Clara found a quiet corner under a bridge to rest, she thought again about Lily and her mother. She remembered the warmth of the tea, the gentle questions, and the way the little girl's eyes had met hers without fear or judgment. Clara allowed herself to feel grateful, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Gratitude was strange, she realized, because it made her feel alive again, connected to something larger than her own struggle. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in her thin coat against the chill, Clara carried with her a quiet hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing. A little kindness, a small act of love, could ripple through her life in ways she had never imagined. She had been given a gift, not a material one, not something that could be counted or measured, but a human connection, simple and pure, that reminded her that life, even in its hardest moments, still had room for hope. The next morning, Clara returned to the church steps, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She wasn't sure why she had agreed to meet Lily again, or why the thought of seeing the little girl made her heart feel lighter. She had spent so long avoiding people, hiding from the world, and protecting herself from disappointment. Yet the memory of yesterday, the hug, the tea, the gentle words pulled her forward. Lily was already there, bouncing lightly on the steps as if she had been waiting for Clara all night. Her red scarf trailed behind her like a ribbon in the breeze, and her tiny boots made little tapping sounds on the stone. When she saw Clara, her face lit up, and she ran toward her with an excitement that was contagious. "Clara!" "You came!" Lily exclaimed, throwing her arms around Clara in a quick hug. The embrace was brief but warm, and Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. She realized once again that she had underestimated the power of simple gestures, small touches, words, or glances that could change a person's entire day. Clara smiled, feeling a little awkward but grateful. "I wouldn't miss it," she said softly. Lily grabbed her hand and led her to a small garden behind the church. The garden was hidden from the street, a quiet place full of flowers, shrubs, and a tiny fountain in the middle. The sunlight reflected off the water, creating dancing patterns on the walls of the nearby church building. Clara stopped for a moment to take it all in. She had not seen so much color and life in what felt like a very long time. "This is my favorite place," Lily said, her eyes shining. "I come here after school sometimes to read or just watch the birds. I think you'll like it." She guided Clara to a small bench near the fountain. Clara sat down carefully, noticing the worn wood and the delicate carvings that had been made long ago. She inhaled the scent of the flowers, roses, daisies, and tiny wildflowers she couldn't name, and felt a calmness settle over her, a quiet contrast to the harshness of the streets. For a long while, they sat in silence, listening to the gentle sound of water trickling from the fountain and the occasional chirping of birds. Clara realized that silence, when shared with someone who cared, could feel comforting instead of lonely. Lily finally spoke, breaking the quiet in her soft, cheerful voice. "Do you like flowers?" she asked, pointing to a small patch of daisies near the bench. Clara nodded, smiling faintly. "I do. They're simple but beautiful." "I like them too," Lily said. "They don't ask for much and they just grow. Even when it's hard, they keep growing." She paused, then looked at Clara with curiosity. "Do you keep growing too?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. The question was simple, but it carried weight. She thought about her life, the cold streets, the hunger, the nights of loneliness. Growing. Could she really keep growing after all she had been through? She looked at the little girl who seemed so sure of herself and realized that perhaps she had no choice. Life kept moving, whether she wanted it to or not. "I hope I can," Clara said quietly, a small smile forming on her lips. Lily's mother arrived soon after, carrying a small basket of pastries and fruit. She spread a blanket on the grass and invited Clara to sit. The gesture was gentle, unassuming, yet it made Clara feel as if she had been invited into a small, safe world, a place where she didn't have to hide or defend herself. She took a piece of bread and a small apple, savoring each bite as though it were a luxury. They spent the morning talking. Clara shared more about herself than she had expected, telling Lily and her mother stories from her childhood, small memories that were easier to speak of, learning to draw, playing in the park with her friends, reading books under the covers with a flashlight when she was supposed to be sleeping. She laughed softly at some of the memories, and Lily giggled along, fascinated by the idea of a world so different from her own. In return, Lily talked about school, her favorite subjects, and the games she played with her friends. She asked Clara questions that seemed simple but were filled with genuine interest. "What was your favorite color when you were little?" she asked. Clara thought for a moment. "Blue," she said finally. "Like the sky," Lily smiled. "I like blue too. It's calm, but it can be so big and endless. Kind of like hope, I think." Clara felt a lump in her throat. The words were simple, yet they carried an unspoken truth. Hope. It was something she had buried deep inside, thinking it was lost forever. But here, in the company of a child who had no reason to care for her, hope was beginning to stir again. After a while, Clara noticed something she hadn't expected: laughter. She laughed, truly laughed, a sound that felt foreign to her own ears. It was small at first, hesitant, but then it grew, spilling out into the quiet garden. Lily laughed along, her small hands clapping with joy. Clara realized how long it had been since she had laughed freely, without fear, without worry. The feeling was almost dizzying, a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. As they sat together, Clara began to open up in ways she hadn't before. She talked about the struggles she had faced, the nights spent cold and hungry, and the feelings of being invisible to the world. Lily listened quietly, her eyes wide, her small hand occasionally brushing against Clara's arm. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't pity. She just listened. "You're very brave," Lily said finally, her voice soft. "I think you're stronger than most people I know." Clara blinked, surprised. The words were not flattery, they were honest, childlike, and heartfelt. For a moment, Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long feeling weak, helpless, and alone. And here was a little girl, offering her courage in a few simple words. Clara realized that connection could be a kind of strength. She thought about the streets, the harshness, the nights of cold and fear. And she understood that while the world could be cruel, moments like these, small and unexpected, could make a difference. They could remind someone that they were not alone, that they mattered, that they were capable of more than they had believed. Time passed quickly, and soon it was afternoon. Lily and her mother began packing up to leave, but Lily grabbed Clara's hand and looked up at her with a bright smile. "Will you come again tomorrow?" she asked. "We can explore the rest of the garden." Clara nodded, feeling a sense of warmth and belonging that she hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll come," she said softly. The words felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because she knew life on the streets would still be difficult, but light because she had something to look forward to, something to hold on to, a small spark of hope that could grow if nurtured. As Clara walked back through the streets toward the place she had come to call her temporary home, she reflected on the morning. The garden, the laughter, the stories, they had all left a mark on her. She realized that human connection, even in the simplest form, could heal in ways that material things never could. A smile, a hug, a question asked with genuine care. These were gifts that no one could take away. That night, as Clara found a quiet corner to rest, she thought about the little girl who had reached out to her without fear, without judgment. She thought about the kindness of Lily's mother and the warmth of the sunlit garden. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of possibility, a sense that life could hold moments of beauty even in hardship. She allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone, where she could find small joys, and where connection could help her heal. And as sleep overtook her, Clara held onto a quiet thought. Perhaps strength was not only about surviving hardship, but also about letting others in, even when it was difficult, and trusting that kindness could be found in the most unexpected places. Lily's small gesture, her simple words, and her unshakable innocence had reminded Clara of something essential, that even in a hard world, hope could grow if one let it. Over the next few days, Clara found herself returning to the church more often than she had expected. At first, it had been just to see Lily, to share a moment of warmth and human kindness that she hadn't felt in months. But as she spent more time there, she began to notice other people, the volunteers, the neighbors, and even strangers who came to the church for small acts of service or fellowship. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of community that she had long forgotten existed. Each morning, she would arrive early, settling onto the familiar cold steps, waiting for the first glimpses of sunlight to touch the stone. She would watch as the neighborhood slowly came to life, shopkeepers opening their stores, children running toward school buses, and familiar faces nodding in passing. Some of these people had once ignored her or looked away with suspicion. But here she felt invisible no longer. She had begun to recognize a few friendly faces, people who would smile or wave in acknowledgement. Lily continued to be her constant companion. Each day, the little girl greeted Clara with the same bright energy, pulling her into small adventures around the church grounds. Some days they would wander through the garden, identifying flowers and plants, while other days they would sit on the steps and read picture books that Lily brought from home. These moments, simple as they seemed, had a profound impact on Clara. The consistency, the laughter, and the small gestures of care began to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. One afternoon, as Clara and Lily walked through the quiet garden, Lily stopped and pointed toward a small shed tucked behind a row of trees. "See that?" she asked. "That's where they keep the extra blankets and food for people who need them. Some of the volunteers let me help sometimes. Do you want to see inside?" Clara hesitated. She had been too shy, too proud, or too wary to accept help in many years. But something in Lily's gaze encouraged her to step forward. She nodded slowly, and together they approached the shed. The door creaked as it opened, revealing stacks of blankets, boxes of food, and other supplies. It was simple, practical, and full of care. Clara felt a small warmth spread through her chest. These were not grand gestures, they were small acts of kindness, made tangible through effort and thoughtfulness. "Do you want one of the blankets?" Lily asked softly. Clara shook her head at first, embarrassed. "No, thank you," she said, but the little girl's gentle insistence wore her down. With a small smile, Clara accepted the offer, wrapping the soft fabric around her shoulders. It was warm and comforting, yes, but more importantly, it was a symbol of human care, a reminder that someone thought enough of her to provide for her, even in small ways. The volunteers at the church also began to notice Clara. At first, they treated her politely, cautiously, unsure of her intentions or trustworthiness. But as days passed, her regular presence, combined with her growing confidence and willingness to engage, made them curious. One volunteer, a middle-aged man named Thomas, approached her one morning. "You've been coming here a lot," he said kindly. "Would you like to help out in some way? We could use a hand with organizing donations or helping in the garden." Clara blinked in surprise. No one had asked her to contribute in such a way before. Usually, people offered charity with hesitation, as if she were unworthy. But Thomas's words were different. They were inclusive, respectful, and empowering. She felt a rush of gratitude and possibility. I think I'd like that," she replied softly. Over the next few weeks, Clara began helping in small ways. She learned how to organize blankets and food, how to care for the garden, and how to interact with people who came seeking assistance. Each small task, each act of participation, strengthened her confidence. She realized that while she still faced hardships, she was capable of contributing, of making a difference, and of being part of something larger than herself. Through these experiences, Clara began to notice changes within herself. The hopelessness that had once weighed heavily on her chest began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. She started thinking about her future, not in grand terms but in small, manageable steps. Could she find a job? Could she secure housing? Could she continue to be part of a community that cared? The questions were daunting, but the thought of Lily, of the volunteers, and of the small acts of kindness that had touched her life gave her courage. One chilly morning, as Clara was tending to the garden with Lily by her side, the little girl asked, "Do you ever feel scared?" Clara paused, considering her answer. "Yes," she admitted finally. "Sometimes very scared. But I feel less scared when I'm here with you and the others." Lily smiled. "I think that's because you're not alone anymore. You have friends now." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long in isolation, believing she could trust no one, that the world was cold and unforgiving. But Lily's words reminded her that trust could be rebuilt slowly, carefully, through repeated acts of kindness and shared experiences. She realized that connection, however small, was powerful enough to transform her outlook on life. The small moments continued to accumulate, each one leaving a mark on Clara's heart. One afternoon, she noticed a new family arrive at the church, carrying a young boy who seemed shy and hesitant. Clara watched as the volunteers welcomed them warmly, offering blankets and food, and she realized that she had begun to see herself in a different light, not as someone entirely broken, but as someone capable of empathy, of understanding, of helping others who struggled. This realization sparked a shift in Clara's perspective. She began to view her own hardships not only as challenges, but as experiences that could give her insight into the struggles of others. She began offering small gestures of care, helping someone carry a box, offering a warm smile, or simply listening. These actions, in turn, reinforced her sense of belonging and purpose. She began to see that while life could be difficult, kindness had a way of creating a ripple effect, touching more lives than she had imagined. One evening, as the sun set behind the church, Clara and Lily sat on the steps together. The sky was painted with soft shades of pink and gold, the light reflecting off the fountain and garden below. Lily leaned against Clara's shoulder, content and quiet. Clara felt a deep sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She realized that these small, daily connections, the laughter, the shared stories, the gentle gestures, were slowly building a foundation for a better life. Clara also noticed that her perspective on herself had changed. She no longer felt invisible or worthless. Instead, she recognized that she had value, that she could contribute, and that she could belong. The kindness she had received from Lily and her mother, the volunteers, and the small community at the church had opened doors within her that had long been closed. She began to see herself not only as a survivor, but as someone capable of hope, courage, and growth. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Clara still faced hardships, the cold nights, the uncertainty, the hunger, but she no longer faced them alone. She had people who cared, and she had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. She realized that healing and growth were not linear, but each day offered small opportunities to rebuild, reconnect, and rediscover hope. By the end of the month, Clara had become a regular presence at the church, both helping and being helped. She had developed friendships, found moments of joy, and discovered that her life could be touched by kindness in ways she had thought impossible. She had also begun to understand that her journey was not only about receiving care, but also about giving it, helping others, sharing her time, and being a source of hope for those who needed it. And as she walked back to her temporary resting place one evening, Clara thought about how far she had come. A little girl's hug had sparked a chain of events that changed her life, reminding her that even in the darkest moments, light could be found in unexpected places. She realized that healing was possible, and that the world, despite its challenges, could hold beauty, compassion, and love. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude, hope, and a quiet determination. She knew that the journey ahead would still have difficulties, but she also knew that she no longer had to face them alone. With Lily, her mother, the volunteers, and the small acts of kindness that continued to touch her life, Clara felt ready to take the next steps, to embrace the possibilities, and to continue growing in a world that had once seemed impossibly cold. The weeks turned into months, and Clara's life slowly began to change in ways she had never imagined possible. Each day at the church brought new experiences, small victories, and moments of connection that gradually filled the empty spaces she had long carried in her heart. The little girl, Lily, remained her constant companion, her presence a reminder of the simple kindness that had started Clara on this journey toward hope. One chilly morning, Clara stepped onto the church steps wrapped in a warm coat and holding a small notebook and pen. She had begun to take notes, jotting down tasks, ideas, and thoughts she wanted to remember. Writing had become a small act of discipline, a way to organize her life and plan for the future. She felt a sense of purpose she had not experienced in years, a subtle but steady confidence that came from knowing she was no longer invisible. Lily was already waiting, her bright scarf fluttering in the wind. "Good morning, Clara," she called, waving enthusiastically. Clara smiled and waved back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She noticed how small gestures, the wave, the greeting, the shared laughter, had come to mean so much. They were no longer just simple acts of kindness. They were threads of connection that were weaving her back into the fabric of life. That day, the church volunteers invited Clara to join a small planning meeting. They were organizing a community drive for people in need, collecting clothing, food, and school supplies. Clara felt a surge of nervousness as she entered the room. She had spent so long feeling out of place in the world, unsure of how to interact with others, that even ordinary social situations seemed daunting. But the smiles of the volunteers, the encouragement from Lily, and the sense of purpose she felt gave her courage. During the meeting, Clara was asked to help organize the donated clothing. She worked alongside other volunteers, folding shirts, sorting blankets, and arranging shoes. It was simple work, but it mattered. Each item she touched represented a person who needed help, someone who, like her, was seeking comfort and care. Clara realized that her own experiences gave her a unique perspective. She could approach the work with empathy and understanding, imagining how it would feel to receive each item. As she worked, she began to notice the subtle changes within herself. She was no longer the timid, wary woman who had sat on the church steps months ago. She had gained confidence, patience, and a sense of responsibility. She found herself speaking up during discussions, offering ideas, and even helping new volunteers understand the process. The small acts of contribution reinforced her sense of worth and reminded her that she could make a difference, no matter how small her actions might seem. After the meeting, Clara and Lily wandered back to the garden behind the church. The flowers had begun to bloom in vibrant colors, and the fountain sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Clara paused to take it all in, feeling a quiet joy in the simple beauty around her. "It's amazing how much has grown here," she said softly. Lily smiled. "Just like you," she replied. Clara felt her heart swell with emotion. She realized that growth didn't just happen in gardens, it happened in people too, slowly, with care, patience, and encouragement. That evening, as Clara walked back to her temporary resting place, she noticed a flyer taped to a lamppost. It was an advertisement for a small apartment available at an affordable rent. She stopped and read it carefully, her heart racing. Could she really take this step? Could she find stability and a home for herself after so long on the streets? She thought of Lily, the church volunteers, and the small steps she had taken over the past months. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that it might be possible. The next few days were filled with preparation. Clara gathered her belongings, sorted what she could take with her, and said quiet goodbyes to the volunteers who had supported her. Each farewell was tinged with emotion, a reminder of the relationships she had built and the community she had become part of. She carried with her not only her few possessions but also the lessons she had learned, the value of kindness, the power of human connection, and the courage to hope. On the day she moved into her new apartment, Clara felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The space was small, but it was hers. She could arrange it as she wished, sleep in her own bed, and finally feel the comfort of stability. As she unpacked her few belongings, she paused to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. It had begun with a simple hug from a little girl, followed by small acts of kindness, moments of connection, and the patience of a community willing to help her grow. Clara's new routine gradually took shape. She found a part-time job at a small bookstore where she could interact with customers, manage shelves, and handle simple transactions. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth. She learned to manage her time, her money, and her responsibilities. The sense of control over her life, though small, was empowering. She realized that she was capable of building a future for herself, one step at a time. Evenings were often spent at the church garden, where she would meet Lily and her mother. They would read books, tend to the plants, and share stories. These moments, once simple and fleeting, had become anchors in Clara's life. She knew that no matter how challenging her day had been, there was a place of warmth, care, and connection waiting for her. One afternoon, as Clara helped Lily plant new flowers in the garden, the little girl looked up at her and asked, "Do you feel happy now?" Clara smiled, kneeling beside her to pat the soil around a young plant. "Yes," she said softly, "I feel happy and grateful. I never thought I could feel this way again." Lily's eyes sparkled. "I'm glad. You deserve it." Clara's heart ached with emotion. She had spent so long feeling unworthy of kindness, love, and happiness. Yet here she was, surrounded by people who cared, taking steps to build a better life and finding joy in the simplest moments. She realized that happiness wasn't a grand event or a sudden change. It was the accumulation of small acts, the consistent presence of care, and the courage to accept and offer kindness. Over time, Clara began to volunteer at the church in more meaningful ways. She helped organize events, guide newcomers, and mentor others who were facing struggles similar to her own. She shared her story, not as a tale of despair, but as a message of hope, that even in the darkest moments, human connection and kindness could light the way. Each person she helped became a reflection of the journey she had taken, a reminder of the power of empathy and compassion. Through all of this, Clara never forgot the little girl who had changed her life. Lily's hug had been the catalyst, the first spark that had reminded Clara of her own humanity. Clara often thought about how one small act of courage and kindness could ripple through someone's life, transforming despair into hope, isolation into connection, and fear into courage. She knew that without that hug, she might never have taken the first step toward healing. One quiet evening, Clara returned to the church steps alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft pinks and golds. She looked around at the familiar surroundings, the garden, the fountain, the steps where she had first met Lily, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been filled with love, hope, and growth. She realized that her life had been transformed not by grand gestures, but by small, consistent acts of human care. Clara sat on the steps, letting the cool stone support her, and thought about the future. She knew there would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and difficulties to overcome. But she also knew that she had the strength, the community, and the hope to face them. The church, the garden, the volunteers, and the little girl who had offered her a hug had shown her that life, even when hard, could be beautiful, full of opportunity, and filled with love. In that quiet moment, Clara made a promise to herself. She would continue to grow, continue to help others, and continue to nurture the spark of hope that had been lit within her. She would not forget the lessons she had learned, the kindness she had received, or the courage it took to accept help and trust again. And she would share that kindness with others in small gestures and large, so that someone else someday could experience the same warmth that had transformed her life. Months later, Clara had settled fully into her new life. She worked steadily, volunteered regularly, and continued to spend time with Lily and her mother. Her confidence had grown, and she had become a source of inspiration to others at the church. She no longer felt invisible, alone, or unworthy. She had discovered that hope, kindness, and human connection were powerful tools for transformation. And whenever she walked past the steps where it had all begun, Clara remembered the little girl who had offered a simple hug and changed the course of her life. She smiled, knowing that even the smallest acts of love and courage could ripple outward, creating a world where hope could grow, and where even the most vulnerable could find warmth, care, and a place to belong. Clara's journey had taught her that life's true value was not measured by wealth, comfort, or possessions, but by the connections we build, the kindness we give and receive, and the courage to keep moving forward. And in her heart, she carried the memory of a hug that had shown her the way back to life, back to hope, and back to herself.